A quiet street bathed in golden light. Houses stood still under the fading sun, and a sleek Audi rolled gently beneath the trees. Inside, a man exhaled deeply after a long day in court, just minutes from home, finally at peace. But flashing red and blue lights exploded behind him. A police officer approached, cold, sharp, without question, without pause, just commands. And the man behind the wheel? A respected judge. A symbol of justice. Treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. That peaceful evening shattered in an instant. Eyes turned. Phones were raised. And what happened next didn't just shake one life, it shook the very foundation of a system. You won't believe what unfolds next. Before we begin, let us know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? We'd love to hear your voice. The soft hum of the Audi's engine whispered beneath the fading rays of a golden sunset. Judge Nathaniel Carter drove through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Woodridge Heights, where the world often felt a little more at peace, like the courtroom's weight melted away, mile by mile. Jazz played low from the stereo. His hands, steady and sure, rested gently on the wheel. He was headed home. And home meant silence, comfort, a moment to breathe. But then came the flash of red and blue in the rearview mirror. A siren tore through the calm. Nathaniel frowned, easing the car to the curb with practiced care. He wasn't speeding. The plates were new. The paperwork? Flawless. Still, he'd learned never to dismiss the unexpected, especially not in his own skin. The patrol car pulled up behind him. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out. Dark sunglasses, square jaw, and a badge that gleamed in the setting sun. Officer Bradley Harper. The kind of man who didn't ask questions. He just issued commands. He marched to the driver's window and knocked twice. Sharp. Impatient. Nathaniel rolled it down, keeping both hands visible on the steering wheel. License and registration, Harper said, not with curiosity, but authority. His voice didn't allow space for questions. Nathaniel handed them over. Professional. The same way he'd responded to hundreds of witnesses on the stand. Good evening, officer. I'm Judge Nathaniel Carter. I live in this neighborhood. Is there a problem? Harper didn't blink, didn't acknowledge the introduction. His eyes scanned the license, then settled back on Nathaniel. Cold. Calculating. This vehicle matches the description of one reported stolen. It landed like thunder. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. That's not possible. I bought this car last week. The title and registration are in my name. If you check the system. I said step out of the vehicle. Harper's hand drifted near his holster. Not drawn, but not resting either. Nathaniel stared at him. The choice wasn't real. Refuse and escalate. Comply and still risk humiliation. So he moved slowly. Precisely. Every motion deliberate. Taught from generations of survival. As he stepped out, the air felt thicker. The kind of silence that came before something terrible. Harper watched him, not as a neighbor, not as a judge, but as a suspect. Maybe even less. Nathaniel stood straight. Shoulders square. Not in defiance, but in dignity. A second patrol car pulled up. Another officer emerged. And just like that, a man who upheld the law for decades now stood under suspicion of breaking it, without a shred of evidence. Nathaniel Carter didn't need a gavel in his hand to feel the weight of justice. But tonight, it wasn't justice he saw in their eyes. It was doubt. It was power, unchecked and unchallenged. And it was about to meet its reckoning. The second officer was younger, leaner, but wore the same hardened stare. He nodded toward Harper without a word, then circled to the back of the Audi, as if the car itself had something to confess. Nathaniel remained motionless beside his vehicle, the handcuff still dangling from Harper's belt like a threat yet to be fulfilled. You say this car is yours, Harper said, circling slowly like a prosecutor walking a jury through evidence. But judges don't usually drive stolen Autos into quiet neighborhoods. Nathaniel lifted his chin, a breath caught between reason and rage. You haven't even run the plates. We have protocols, Harper replied flatly. We'll get to it. After we ensure there are no threats. No threats, Nathaniel repeated, each syllable heavy with restraint. Is that what you see when you look at me? Harper didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the younger officer, who now stood at the rear of the Audi. Pop the trunk. No warrant? Nathaniel asked, not in protest, but in warning. Harper smirked. Probable cause. Suspicious behavior. We're not in court, Judge. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. No, we're not. But the law doesn't end at the curb. Still, he stepped aside. He wasn't resisting, not because he agreed, but because he knew how quickly resistance was recast as aggression. The trunk opened. For a moment, nothing. Then the younger officer paused. There's a bag, he said. Black. Zippered. Harper stepped closer, a predator catching scent. Nathaniel's heart thudded. He knew every inch of his trunk. Golf shoes. An umbrella. A folded overcoat. There had never been a black bag. That's not mine, he said. Calm, but urgent. I've never seen that before. The younger officer glanced up. Receipt inside. Local hardware store. Today's date. Harper raised an eyebrow. Well, isn't that interesting? No, Nathaniel replied. It's convenient. Too convenient. Harper's lips curved upward. Not in humor. In triumph. You're saying someone planted it? In broad daylight? In your own car? I'm saying, Nathaniel said slowly, that this is becoming something far more serious than a routine stop. Harper didn't blink. You're right. It is. And then came the words Nathaniel had feared. Cuff him. No, his voice rose firm and full. You're making a mistake. Harper nodded to his partner. The cuffs snapped shut around Nathaniel's wrists. Cold steel against warm skin. A symbol of power mistaken for justice. I'm Judge Nathaniel Carter, he shouted, the words echoing through the street. Porch lights flicked on. Blinds shifted. Phones began recording. And what began as silence was about to become noise. A tidal wave of witnesses. Because somewhere in the distance, the system had cracked, and the truth was starting to pour through. Nathaniel stood still, wrists restrained, pride unraveling thread by thread. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his skin, not because they were tight, but because they were wrong. Every second they stayed on spoke louder than the officer's accusations, each one a small betrayal in a system he had spent his life defending. Harper paced nearby, trying to appear unfazed, but the rhythm of his boots on the pavement was too quick, too erratic. Behind him, the second officer scanned the crowd that had begun to swell. Porch lights dotted the cul-de-sac like a stage set, and silhouettes hovered at windows and doorways. Some held phones, others whispered, but all of them watched. And Nathaniel knew they weren't just watching him. They were watching what power looked like when it forgot to be just. I need you to sit, Harper barked, gesturing toward the curb like he was talking to a suspect on a Friday night, not a state judge in his own zip code. Nathaniel didn't flinch. This isn't protocol. Harper stiffened. I decide protocol. Nathaniel's gaze didn't move. You shouldn't. The tension between them crackled like a downed wire. Harper's breath grew louder, sharper. He looked past Nathaniel for the first time, realizing the gathering crowd had shifted. They weren't passive anymore. A woman across the street muttered something to her husband. A teenager stood on the hood of a parked car, angling his phone higher. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud, but it cut through everything. That's Judge Carter. It came from an older man in a worn flannel, stepping forward from his driveway. He married my niece last summer. That's his car. He's lived here longer than half of us. Harper turned, his confidence denting. Sir, please return to your home. The man didn't move. Why's he in cuffs? Nathaniel stayed silent, letting the moment speak. He didn't need to argue anymore. The truth had stepped into the light on its own. Harper's radio crackled at his hip. Static, then a dispatcher's voice. Unit 42, be advised. Vehicle in question registered to a Nathaniel Carter, Woodridge Heights resident. No alerts, no violations. Harper's face went still. No expression. No blink. Just stillness. The second officer looked at him, then back at Nathaniel. "He told you who he was." Harper didn't answer. Instead, he stepped away, lips tight, shoulders squared, trying to retreat into the authority of his uniform, even as it sagged beneath the weight of his mistake. Nathaniel lowered himself to the curb, not in surrender, but in silence. He wasn't going to speak yet, because sometimes, when a system fails, you don't shout over it. You let it hear the echo of its own collapse. And the crowd was already listening. The silence didn't last long. A police cruiser pulled up with a low hum, its headlights washing the scene in stark white light. From the driver's seat emerged Captain James Holloway, tall, graying at the temples, and with a no-nonsense posture of someone who'd seen too much and learned too little. His eyes scanned the crowd first, then the cuffs, then Nathaniel. And that's when his face changed. He didn't speak immediately. He didn't have to. The tension clung to him like smoke, and his expression already screamed one question. What the hell happened here? Harper straightened, almost militarily. "Captain, we had a matching stolen vehicle alert. Suspicious bag in the trunk. Protocol was followed. Was it?" The captain's voice was low, controlled, but every syllable carried weight. He stepped closer to Nathaniel, still seated on the curb, hands cuffed, eyes calm but blazing. "Mr. Carter." "Judge Carter," Holloway corrected himself mid-sentence. "Sir, Nathaniel stood without being asked. He rose like a man who wasn't just reclaiming his position, but reasserting what had been stolen. "Don't finish that sentence with, 'sorry.' You've said that to the wrong people too many times." Holloway's jaw tightened. "Let's get those cuffs off." Harper hesitated. Holloway didn't. He gestured sharply, and the second officer moved in, uncuffing Nathaniel with trembling hands. The metal clicked open and fell away. Nathaniel didn't rub his wrists. He didn't wince. He just looked Holloway dead in the eye. "You want to know what makes this different from all those other incidents you've read about?" Nathaniel asked, voice clear enough for the crowd to hear. "This one has a face you recognize." Holloway shifted uncomfortably. Nathaniel stepped forward, not to intimidate, but to be seen. "I've stood behind benches and ruled on cases where officers made honest mistakes. I've defended this system in courtrooms where everyone wanted to tear it down. But today, this system mistook me for a threat because I was tired, in a nice car, and black." The captain's voice cracked. "Judge Carter, I had no idea." "That's the problem," Nathaniel cut in, his tone like steel under velvet. "Your officers aren't trained to see people. They're trained to see problems." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Neighbors, strangers, even a few off-duty officers now stepping closer from their porches, their phones lowered but still recording. Their faces weren't angry. They were exhausted. They'd seen this show before. But this time, the main character wore a judge's robe in every courtroom, except this one. "I'll be filing a report," Holloway said quietly. "No," Nathaniel said. "You'll be holding a press conference. Tonight. You'll explain why a man like me, in his own neighborhood, can still be treated like a thief on sight. And then you'll tell this city what you're going to change." "And if I don't?" Nathaniel didn't blink. "You already know what happens next." Because the truth was no longer locked in a file. It was out here now, walking, breathing, and being filmed from a dozen different angles. And this time, it was dressed in dignity. The kind no badge could ever strip away. Captain Holloway didn't answer immediately. His silence wasn't confusion. It was calculation. He looked around, saw the growing crowd, the phones, the children clutching their parents' sleeves with wide, worried eyes. This wasn't just a procedural slip-up anymore. This was a reckoning. "All right," he said finally, his voice tired but resolute. "Tonight, we'll address this publicly. No scripts. No PR spin. Just facts." Nathaniel gave a single nod. Not approval, expectation. But before the captain could speak again, an older woman from across the street stepped forward. Linda Martinez. Nathaniel's neighbor of 20 years. Fierce as ever, her silver hair tied back, face stern, voice unwavering. "You don't get applause for doing what you should have done in the first place," she said, her tone slicing through the tension. "He's lived here longer than most of us. paid taxes, raised kids, spoke at my granddaughter's graduation. And tonight, you let your officer treat him like he didn't belong. Like we wouldn't care. Her voice broke slightly. But we do. There was no cheer. Just quiet nods. Tears in someone's eyes. Phone still filming, but now slower, less frenzied. The moment was no longer just viral. It was real. Harper stood off to the side, her posture crumbling. For the first time, the weight of her actions sank deep enough to be seen. She didn't look at Nathaniel. She couldn't. Her arms were folded, but not from pride, just to hold herself together. Mitchell, the second officer, shifted awkwardly beside her. Then he stepped forward. "Sir, Judge Carter." His voice was tentative. I know it's not my place, but I just want to say, I'm sorry. I should have stopped it. I should have spoken up sooner." Nathaniel looked at him, his gaze piercing but not cruel. "You had a choice," he said evenly. "Next time, make the right one." Mitchell nodded, swallowing hard. The press conference that night wasn't flashy. No banners. No political speeches. Just a small podium set up outside the precinct. A few floodlights. A larger crowd than expected. Captain Holloway stepped up first. He didn't sugarcoat it. "We failed." He explained what had happened. He named names. He promised reforms, mandatory bias training, updated traffic stop protocols, community ride-alongs, a permanent civilian oversight board. And then he stepped aside. Nathaniel took the microphone. He wore a plain black jacket. No robe. No medals. Just the weariness of a man who had once again been forced to prove his humanity. "I don't speak tonight as a judge," he began, his voice clear, "but as a black man in America. A neighbor. A father. A citizen." He told the story, not for sympathy, but for truth. He didn't shout. Didn't blame. But every word landed like thunder. We talk about justice like it's a thing to be handed down from on high. But sometimes, it's just about standing up when you're forced to kneel. Sometimes, it's about staying calm when your rights are unraveling in front of you. He looked directly at Harper in the crowd, who had dared to come. And sometimes, it's about forgiving people who haven't yet learned how to see you. There was no applause. Just silence. The kind that comes not from indifference, but from deep reflection. Nathaniel turned, stepped away from the mic, and walked into the crowd. Not above them, not separate from them, but among them. Because justice, he believed, shouldn't just be served.